Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of Biopharm Catalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Biopharm Catalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome once again to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is Tuesday, May 26, 2026, post-Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, and really excited to have Sheff on again for another episode of our podcast to discuss some of what's been going on in the markets as well as upcoming catalysts. So as always, welcome back, Sheff.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and there's so much to talk about. It's interesting from month to month, the changes that happen and the advances that happen within this sector. It continually impresses me every single month. So lots to go over. So I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening in or watching on YouTube, I did want to point out, when we walk through all of this, we always do a screen share of Biopharm Catalyst just so folks can see the breadth of our tools and all of the products that we have to offer and how we actually use them in real time. I did want to mention that we are running our annual sale currently. So if you haven't subscribed to Biopharm Catalyst in the past, or even if you have, you're able to take advantage of that sale. You can just click on the sign up page via the banner or start free trial in the upper right hand corner. You get a 7-day free trial with us, cancelable at any time. And then we are running some pretty severe discounts across all of our plans. So please feel free to take a look at that and sign up if you're interested and you think that the information we're providing is valuable. So just wanted to make mention of that. But yeah, let's get into it, Sheff. I think you and me were chatting a little bit before the podcast, and we wanted to. In one of the previous episodes, we had discussed the FDA's one pivotal trial, right? And I think that actually played itself out in one of the trades that you had discussed, Outlook, OTLK, I believe. So I just wanted to see if you wouldn't mind just kind of walking us through that, how that worked, and sort of how that's going to play itself out with maybe some other tickers and some other things that are coming up.
So basically, if you look at what has happened, there was a complete response in December, and it seemed like they started this whole timeline again, where they had a Type A meeting with the FDA in February to go over why they got a complete response. Then after that, basically the FDA said, look, you're going to have to do an FDR, which is a federal dispute resolution, which oftentimes doesn't necessarily result in what the results that the company is expecting or would like to have. But with this situation, it was different because, of course, they had pretty much been definitive with regards to the clinical studies. They had one successful phase 3 clinical study that showed statistical significance in terms of efficacy and safety. And that went to the one pivotal study rule that the FDA put in place in February. So the theory was being tested. Could this be tested for a company that has 3 times been shown the door where the FDA believed they hadn't given all the information they needed to get this drug approved in its totality, even though the company had 4 different studies. So they had the meeting with the FDA, the ombudsman, and then today there was just a great resolution for the company, which basically said that the U.S. FDA granted the appeal following completion of the formal dispute resolution process with the Office of New Drugs Administration. And so the FDA concluded that there was substantial evidence of effectiveness that had been established by Lentinava for the treatment of neovascular age-related macular degeneration. And as a result, Outlook Therapeutics expects to resubmit their ONS 5010 Lentinava BLA in June of 2026. So, and then right after that, in the formal response, the Office of New Drugs determined that the results of the NORSE 2 trial, together with confirmatory evidence in the NORSE 8, natural history, mechanistic, and pharmacodynamic data established substantial evidence of effectiveness, which means they don't have to do another clinical trial and they don't have to go into a AdCom. So the response directs the division and OSM to work with Outlook Therapeutics to reach an agreement on the final labeling. And as indicated in the formal decision, it's anticipated this will be a Class 1 resubmission with a PDUFA date and decision that's expected within 60 days of the FDA's receipt of the resubmission. So let's just say it's the end of June 30th, then there's 60 days from June 30th, which would be August 30th. So obviously it's going to occur in the third quarter. And it is a huge win for a small company like Outlook that really ran out of resources financially. They were hanging on. They just did a filing last week for additional cash, $5 million. They only had, I believe, $6 or $7 million left. And had this not worked out, they would have probably had an AdCom, or if the FDA asked for additional clinical studies, it would have required more time and money. So this is a huge win for the one pivotal study rule. And that's Outlook. And the reason why this is important is because you have other companies upcoming that are going to be submitting their NDAs, and they have one successful study and one study that's not successful in terms of the primary endpoint, but the totality of the data and the secondary endpoint for Vistagen was successful. So they're going to have this third study in June. And if that's positive, they'll have 2 positive studies, Vistagen, VTGN. And so if it's not, they're going to take that third study and just use the totality of the data with the one confirmatory study that was successful. And, they'll submit it to the NDA. So that could work for Vistagen, which is a company that has a lot of cash right now. And, they, have the opportunity to have a solid study with the FDA in June. Or if, like I said, if it doesn't hit its primary endpoint, they're going to have a meeting with the FDA to discuss further for their drug for social anxiety disorder. So it's a big opportunity. And then you have GOSS, which had a failed study in PAH, peripheral arterial hypertension, and it's 20 cents, kind of like where Outlook was, but they hit their secondary endpoint. And so they're saying without even one successful study, they're going to talk to the FDA and see, based on the results that they have, if they can submit their data for an NDA. So they're even going with less data because they don't have one successful pivotal study. They've got one study that didn't hit the primary endpoint, their top line phase 3 data, but they hit their secondary endpoint. So it's interesting. I think this one pivotal study theory, or the totality of the data, is going to continue to be tested.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And it's a great example there. Like you said, big impact for a small company. And that's something that obviously a lot of our subscribers and viewers are interested in. And so we can see obviously why this is such a big deal. So appreciate you walking us through that, Sheff. Just switching gears real quick before we move over to the catalyst stuff. We don't talk a ton about medical devices. We obviously do have a medical device calendar for Biopharm Catalyst. For those of you on the line, the reality is that we get a lot less data and a lot less frequent updates when it comes to medical devices. So it isn't, we don't have quite as much transparency as we do for the drug companies that we cover, but it is something that we do track. I did want to have Sheff, I know you track a lot of the de novo stuff, and I wanted you to walk through some of that, because I know that's obviously been something that you've been across lately.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you. And, the de novo process is a newer process by the FDA in the past 2 or 3 years. It's a way to get a medical device that has the safety and tolerability across the finish line faster than a PMA, which is a pre-marketing authorization, which oftentimes can take 1 to 2 years. De novo is a faster, more efficient process, and it typically takes a year. So you had Spectral AI, ticker symbol Mary, David, Apple, Indigo, and Spectral AI created this predictive medical diagnostics tool that aids in the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of a variety of superficial wounds and burns. So they submitted their de novo application in June of 2025. And today, their their Deep View system was approved in the de novo category. And so in the pre-market, that was trading about 310. Obviously, throughout the day, it got traded off and sold off, similar to Outlook, which went from 30 cents to 75 cents in the pre-market, traded most of the day through 50 to 40 cents, and then closed right under 40. But Spectral AI, it's interesting. This AI Deep View system allows clinicians an objective and immediate assessment of a wound healing potential. So the technology is poised to become even more advanced as deep learning algorithms continue to be incorporated. And the thing about MDAI is it adds new features. It's going to add new features and indications over time. So the advanced wound care market's large. It's underpenetrated, it's disjointed in terms of care pathways. It often leaves patients suffering longer than necessary with chronic wounds and burns. But this technology has shown improved efficiency in clinical studies. And it's thought that this deep view has the potential to improve and speed up treatment in its initial targeted market. So it's a large market. So I think investors are going to continue to appreciate, what not only they did here, but it's going to be easier there for them to file additional de novo applications indications now that their device has been approved. So it's significant because we're starting to see AI in medical technology that we haven't seen before. I mean, we hear it with clinicians and their notes and how they're doing patient assessment when they see a patient one-on-one. But when you have a device that's actually able to categorize whether a wound or a superficial uh, burn is going to be able to be treated at any given point in time, and what the severity of that is. This AI technology is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's real, very cool. And we know how much the AI landscape is changing. Just drug development as a whole. Certainly, obviously, from a medical device standpoint, we're seeing it in real time here. So that's a really cool example, and I'm glad you were able to walk us through that, Sheff. Because again, I know it's something that a lot of folks do ask us about medical devices. And if you are interested in medical devices and trading them, de novo is definitely something to be taking a look at. So I think that's it's a really good example of how that can play out. So thanks.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to say on that is that, usually, obviously with the PDUFA plays, it's usually 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
So the thing that's easier with the de novo is usually a company will update at their yearly calls, or quarterly calls, excuse me. So we were told at the recent quarterly call by the CEO in May that they were going to have approval in June. And so it really gave the investor a chance to hear the confidence that the CEO had in terms of their communications. Because with Novo, they submit the information, and then usually within 60 days, the FDA comes back and says, we need more information. And they do this back and forth toggle. Whereas with a PDUFA, unless you have breakthrough designation, you have easier access to the FDA. Well, oftentimes you submit the information and then you wait.
Yeah.
And you wait. And so it can be a game of cat and mouse sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Sheff. Really appreciate it. So yeah, let's jump over to the catalyst for this month and kind of what you're looking at for the next couple weeks and the next couple months if you wanna walk through some of the Watchlist stuff. If you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth, and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.biofarmcatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description.
Absolutely. So first I'm going to start off with what's going to happen this week, because there's some things that are going to be some, I'll talk about them more, but it just gives people a heads up in terms of what's coming up near term. Mankind is going to have, their PDUFA date on the 29th for Afrezza in adolescents with type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. So, that is one to watch. They have two PDUFA dates. They have that one in May, and then they have another that they're going to have in July. But the one in May obviously is the near term, so that's upcoming. Apria Therapeutics, ticker symbol APRE, is going to have data on May 30th. They're going to be talking about additional safety and efficacy data for their APR 1051 at ASCO. So, obviously we've talked in the past about big meetings. Well, ASCO is upcoming, and it's one of the biggest meetings for a lot of these smaller companies. So, they're going to have data on the 30th. So that's important. Perspective Therapeutics, May 30th, they're going to have updated VMT ANET data at ASCO. So that's really important. And I think those are the three upcoming that I just want to make sure that people had on their radar. I don't own any of those, but they are companies to watch and to keep an eye out for. So as we get into the catalysts, I've already talked about Outlook. OTLK was a great trade. People have asked, and I know people are thinking, how should I look to trade that again? And obviously, they have a annual meeting coming up in July. And when they just put out a filing last week, the filing talked about increasing their authorized shares and also potentially looking at a reverse split. So I think they need to get a reverse split because they need to be compliant with NASDAQ. And so I see that what can happen is that people wait until after the reverse split, which is their annual meeting. It'll be sometime in the first or second week of July. That's going to coincide with, the resubmission. Obviously, the resubmission is at the end of June. So, once they do that, oftentimes the price will go down from a reverse split. You let it settle, and then you have from the middle of July till the end of August to play that run and that move into their PDUFA date. Because obviously it will trade much easier with fewer shares on the market. And right now they've got a lot of shares outstanding. So I think it's important for people to understand that, obviously they've been burning on fumes. If 120 million shares, outstanding, they've got 92 million in the float. So it traded a lot today. And so I think that it'll give them a chance to just kind of get resettled. be compliant with NASDAQ, and then, we'll hear more about their story. But it is a play, I think, for after their annual meeting in July to get back in. So that's that. GRCE, I just want to touch upon Grace Therapeutics. We talked about that one. That one was $5. We talked about that being a first timer to the FDA and not trading that. And it turned out to be the right call because the FDA came back and said that they needed additional information and gave them a complete response. So the stock went from $5 to the high ones, and it's since moved up in the mid 230s. But of course, they were trying to. They had a PDUFA date of April 23rd, and they were looking for the FDA to review their submission and seek approval for GTX 104 and the treatment of aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage, so ASAH. So you wanted to just cover that because that's one that we spoke about. We covered MDAI, which got approved today. And then the next one I want to talk about was HCWB. And when we spoke about that stock, we spoke about that being a really thin trader. Why? It had 6 million shares in the float. It was 30 cents. And we talked about there being data upcoming. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up, giving their earnings report, and they spoke a little bit about alopecia areata. And they didn't give the full data set, but they talked about some of the preclinical data that they had seen. Well, subsequently, because that's a very small float stock, as we talked about, very volatile, 6 million shares, 6.7 million shares outstanding, 6 million shares in the float. That stock, after they came out with their earnings, went from 30 cents to $1.80. And subsequently, over the past week or so, it's gotten as high as $4. And so right now it's settled about 260, but still, it's 9 times what it was at 30 cents. And so I bring that up because these small float companies that have, we've talked about it, news that can be phase 1 or phase 2, open label or preclinical, can oftentimes move a stock because you have day traders trying to jump on those small cap companies, and it can drive the stock up significantly, which is what it did with HCW Biologics. Would I be a buyer now? Probably not. They have a annual meeting that's going to come up on June 15th, and they had been asking investors to vote on a reverse split of the stock. They may not do that now because remember when they had set this meeting, it was in April when we had our last podcast, and the stock was 30 cents. So not only were they not compliant because they weren't $1 and they fell below the minimum bid requirement, but it was also a company that was cash strapped. They've since met that, because obviously it's 260, and they've done an offering off of that. So I think they're settled in for cash. They're settled in with their stock price, and now people are just waiting for this phase 1 multi-center dose escalation study of their HCW 9302, which is designed to treat up to 30 patients, but that is their study for alopecia areata. So that could end up coming sometime in June. I'm going to be watching that close. If I did get a position, it would be a small position, but with the float the way it is, it can move significantly. So HCWB, that was, I had people reaching out and saying, thanks for that. Hey, are there any others? Are there any others that you know of? Yeah. And that leads me to GCTK. GCTK is glucotrack, and I've spoken about that before. Glucotrack, I didn't own it at the time, but this is really an important time for the company. The reason being is because the company is running out of cash. They literally have a month and a half left of cash. And they had a notice from NASDAQ saying that they fall below the bid requirement of $1, and they also fall below the 2.5 million in equity required. And so the FDA was going to delist them on May 18th. on May 20th, if they didn't receive notice from the company on May 18th that they wanted to hold a meeting with the company so that they could talk with the FDA, the company GlucoTrack could talk with the FDA on how that they would reach that minimum threshold. But here we go. They've got two catalysts that are upcoming prior to their meeting. And I think they're gonna look to break some significant news. The first thing being an investigational device exemption, which is an IDE, and they submitted that IDE on May 7th to the FDA to initiate a U.S. clinical study for its fully implantable continuous glucose monitoring technology. So that's on May 7th. With an IDE, it's specific. It takes the FDA 30 days. If they don't hear back from the FDA in 30 days, they're good to start their clinical study. And so that gives, and it's usually for small companies, significant news. So that's point number one. They should hear back by June 7th. So that's important. Why is June 7th important? Because at that same time, and they just announced this news today, they're going to be at the American Diabetes Association 2026 scientific sessions. At that session, company leadership is going to present on the fully implantable continuous blood glucose monitoring technology at the scientific sessions, which are going to take place from June 5th to June 8th. And as part of their innovative hub, Mark Tapsack, the PhD, he's GlucoTrack's chief scientific officer, is going to present on the potential of next generation CGM technology that addresses unmet patient needs through direct blood measurements, multi-year implant longevity, and fully implantable design that eliminates on-body wearables. So all this is within 3 days. So on June 7th, they're supposed to get IDE exemption, device approval, and then they're going to be at ADA where they can talk about this. So 2 events in June 5th through June 8th. All of this, I believe, is going to happen on June 7th, and it's going to send their price skyrocketing. Why, you ask? Well, the reason being is because they have a market cap of 3 million shares. They have 6 million shares outstanding. They only have 5 million shares in the float. So it's the same setup as HCBW. The only difference is when we talked about HCBW at 30 cents, the shorted position in that stock was 15%. The shorted position in GlucoTrack right now is 56%. 56%. It reminds me of GameStop. So, when news comes together with a stock that is significantly shorted, and it's not like huge news. The way that small companies usually present it is the FDA approved our IDE, so FDA approval for the IDE, which gives them the opportunity to start a significant clinical study. But that's not usually how traders read it. And so oftentimes the IDE knows is significant. So watch for that, because this could easily go well over $1 and then some. I mean, I thought HCWB would hit $1.50 at the high, and that thing went to $4. So very important to keep that in mind, because there's 2 key clinical catalysts on that news. Moving on, we talked about MannKind. MannKind has a decision on the 29th for Afrezza, regulatory decision. I don't know if I'm going to hold my shares. I mean, it's, I was in around 320. It's around 350, 355. I believe it's their first time with the FDA coming in and looking at that. But I believe the FDA asked them for additional information, so I don't think they specifically received a CRL. But that's one to keep in mind. That's definitely one to be watching, because that could be volatile here over the next few days. Let's see. Let's look at one of my favorite plays, UNCY. UNCY got smacked pretty good today. Not sure why. It could be because the company needed cash, which I don't believe, because those were some things that went around that the company might have needed some cash, but they don't, because the company has a significant cash position. they've got 24 months of cash and they've got over $70 million in cash. So it's significantly de-risked. Obviously, we know that the only thing that investors are waiting on is the reinspection of their facility, which, the FDA had already said that the company that the third party vendor that they had used prior, they're using again. The FDA thought that they had the quickest route to expediting FDA approval because the FDA approval is on June 29th. So, my thought is that, you know, there was something that leaked out, not on the company, but you know how chat boards can be sometimes. Maybe something leaked out on the company. I doubt it. But this one took a hit today, went down to $7. It had been trading around eight-ish or so. And again, in terms of risk reward, it's one of the lowest risk reward. It's one of the highest for rewards, lowest for risks I've seen. But obviously, the only issue is the reinspection of the facility. So obviously, if there's any news tied into that, that could slow it down. But I don't believe that to be the issue. And I've still got my shares, and I'm sticking with that notion right now in terms of my confidence in them. Obviously, it's the number one play for Oppenheimer. H.C. Wainwright has it as its number one play because of the significant financial windfall that they'll receive once they get approval, and then the opportunity for TDAPA, which is another way for the government to fund their drug, would be the only product in that class within the TDAPA space. So that's significant for the company. So that's Unicisive. Singulate, CING. Singulate has a PDUFA of May 31st. Now, they've already been told that there's manufacturing issues. The question is, are they able to fix these manufacturing issues in an expedited time period so they can make their May 31st PDUFA date? I don't think so. I think that they're going to get a complete response letter. The stock's 481 right now. So we've got another week. It could continue to move higher. But people are asking me, would you short the stock? I mean, I don't think I would short it. I would probably maybe look at buying puts, which, is similar. It's just easier to do through your broker. And it's something I'm more comfortable with. But I don't think they're going to get approved this first time through. Again, this is their first time through, and the FDA is already asking them for manufacturing and compliance, information. And I think, again, with it being a week away, that's going to be extremely challenging. So CING is one to keep an eye on. I talked about Unicisive. Let's look at Vistagen, VTGN. That's one that we've owned. I've had that one since, mid 40s. It's 64 cents right now. I think we're going to get another push as we get through June because they're expecting top line data from their Palisade 4 study by the end of Q2. And they're using AI. They're using all kinds of additional tools to make sure that their patients that have been recruited to the study are being followed appropriately so that they can hit their primary endpoint. And so, I think Vistagen has a lot of cash. They've got $33 million in cash. They've got about 6 months left in cash. So company feels extremely confident. I've listened to the CEO discussion, and I think we should get a run. Whether you hold it through the end of June or not is another situation. That's your thoughts as a trader. But I think running this into the middle of June is safe to say, as the CEO has discussed, that the catalyst is at the end of June, not middle of June or beginning of June, but at the end of June. So I think the middle of June, after, if you're looking to cut bait, you might look at the 15th of June or after. I don't think I'd hold too much closer to that if you're feeling comfortable with the gains you've locked in. Guts. Let's look at GUTS, Fractal Health. That one we've been in, we started talking around that one in the 46, 47 range, 90 cents. I think we're going to see over $1. They're expecting Reveal 1 data at the end of June. They don't have it in there, but they have open label Remain data that is supposed to be um, that's supposed to be presented. And so that data, that's open label data, and management feels extremely confident in that data. They're also are positioned within this rapid coverage framework to get their product approved. Obviously, they've also got Revita, which is a device um, that helps patients that have come off a GLP-1. And so they've got a lot of catalysts. They've got, again, one before June. They've got the Rejuva regulatory feedback from their CTAs in the second quarter, and then their first in human dosing of Rejuva 001 in preliminary data in pancreatic cancer. So they've got a lot of stuff going on. So it's almost a double from where we were originally, but I feel comfortable holding through the middle of June, and then having a smaller position toward the end of June, the back half of June, because I still think the data is going to be positive, but I do want to lock in gains when the opportunity presents itself, and it's definitely presenting itself right now. Let's look at OSTX. That's one of my favorite plays as well. I own that one. Obviously, they've got their HER2 drug in dogs with osteosarcoma. It's their OST HER2. And they've got all their meetings upcoming in this second quarter with, NICE, the EU, the UK, the FDA, to make sure that they're on, par for their accelerated approval. So by September or more, like middle of October, they get that priority review voucher. And, with the accelerated approval, that voucher will give them the opportunity, to sell that voucher for anywhere from $150 to $200 million, which for a company like this is significant because, they have a significantly small market cap at 70. It's not significantly small, but for biotech, it's 70 million, around 70 to $80 million market cap. So it's not extremely high, but you get a priority review voucher, that thing's going to fly because you're going to be able to sell that, as we've seen in the past with other companies. I've been able to sell for anywhere from 150 to 200 million. So they've got 3 things upcoming, which you really need to be looking for. So ASCO 2026, they're going to be presenting 2.5-year overall survival data. They're going to be presenting at Jefferies Healthcare Conference. They're going to be talking about partnering and investor meetings. And then they're going to be at the MIB meeting, which is the MIB Agents Factor for Osteosarcoma Conference. That'll be in Columbus, Ohio. That'll be in June. And they're going to have data presentation. It's June 25th to the June 27th, but it's OIB meeting. And that data is expected to be really strong and positive. So, I think these levels right here, we're not going to see these levels too often because their drug does meet a niche, and it really is a feel-good story when you have a drug that is right on the brink of getting approved for accelerated approval for osteosarcoma in animals and humans as well. So it's pretty amazing. But that stock, we've talked about in the past, it was $1.25, $1.30. It's crept up to about $1.90, and it's pulled back since to $1.75. So obviously, investors are tracking it closely and see the opportunity, for that. So that's that with OSTX. I talked a little bit about Gossamer, and they've got their GOS. They're a 20-cent stock. They've got, almost $60 million in cash. I think 22 cents. Yes. And so they've got a lot of shares outstanding and shares in the float, 235 million shares outstanding, about 217 million in the float. So it doesn't trade, smoothly and easily, but at 20 cents, I think that stock can get to 30 cents. I think we could see a 50-cent pop. The reason being is because they have a meeting with the FDA. They submitted a meeting request. The FDA accepted it, and they have a meeting with the FDA in June to talk about the totality of their data for seralutinib, from their Tory study. So that they didn't show statistical significance for, but they showed other clinical endpoints that were meaningful and meaningful enough that the FDA said, "Yeah, we'll meet with you and on June 15th timeframe and see what we come out with." So providing that meeting is good on June 15th, obviously there's 30 days till the minutes come out. So June 15th to July 15th, anywhere in between, the FDA could come back and say, "Yeah, absolutely, that data looks good. Go on ahead and submit it to the FDA, and we'll take it from there." So that's Gossamer. Uh, TCRX. And I do own Gossamer. I thought 20 cents is a good price to get in at, but I like it. TCRX. They've got um, early clinical data on patients treated in the cohort C of their Aloha study in the second quarter, which is basically at ASCO, um, in leukemia. So, we'll see what happens with that drug, but that company is definitely going to be a presence. It's a company that is focused on transforming cancer treatment using pioneering T cell receptor or TCR discovery platform. And it specifically targets cancer antigens to deliver this precision immunotherapy. So they're definitely a company that bigger companies are looking at, where they're saying, "Hey, you know what? This might be a company that we can significantly invest in, and we see our return on investment being solid if we do decide to do that." T-Scan, the second half cash runway is 152 million, and so it's pretty strong. I mean, for a company with a market cap size that they have, which is 69 to 70 million, and to have double that in cash, I mean, wow, that's pretty amazing. So, um, I think, and I do want to go back to their data. They deal, they have a drug, like I said, a T cell receptor um, that focuses on leukemia. So the discussion is centered around what would constitute a true signal of disease modification rather than transient disease suppression, with efficacy anchored on two codependent endpoints. So I think that's the question. Is the data going to be meaningful when it's presented at ASCO? It remains to be seen, but a lot of analysts really like T-Scan and think it offers an opportunity for significant appreciation and upside. Let's look at Indigo, Mary Paul, IMMP. So this is an Australian company, but they've got, they completed a single ascending dose study. And then they've got the SAD portion of their IMP 761. So they're going to present data at ASCO, I think around 27, 28. Then shortly after, they're going to present data at EULAR on June 4th. And so that's really important. They've got this eftilagimod alpha with weekly paclitaxel. So, definitely a cancer drug. And, we're going to see, how that data reads out. But it's a single ascending dose study of their IMP 761. And in the past, they've shown that, this data was well tolerated across all dose levels. And then their IMP 761 data and phase 1 results will be presented at the EULAR conference on June 4th. So again, you got a catalyst at ASCO, and then you got the EULAR conference on June 4th. Either of those can really, in my opinion, set this stock into motion in terms of investor sentiment on a higher level. Let's look at PRQR, Paul Robert, Quality Robert. And they're a bio company that's dedicated to discovery and development of RNA-based therapies in the treatment of genetic disorders. So they've got data coming out for their AX0810 in the second quarter. And so, management last month, they hosted this analyst day, and the key takeaways included like the management of selected biliary atresia, which is BA, as their AX0810's lead indication. So, they see a large market opportunity with limited competition from investigational treatments. And, they think that product is de-risked. Many analysts think that 0810 is significantly de-risked. And so that gives it the ability to be more attractive to investors at this 150 level. So investor focus remains on this data upcoming for the AX0810's lead indication. And so, we'll see what happens there. June 20th is a PDUFA date for ACHV, Achieve Life Sciences. They just had a significant financing. So obviously investors have confidence in them, but I don't. I just do not think that they're going to get that product across the finish line the first time. I think there might be some manufacturing issues because there's been whispers of manufacturing issues and discussions where manufacturing has called them and they've gone back, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with these manufacturing issues and whether Achieve can get through. Because, they've got a drug that is going to be used for smoking cessation, cystanicline, in their PDUFA, again, is the 20th of June. So maybe that's one that you trade into the catalyst. But sometimes it's hard to know because if you see an obstacle in front of that catalyst, it doesn't allow it to run properly in terms of appreciation price that you can get out of at a certain time period. So, Achieve is one to watch for June. I've talked about UNCY being June 29th. Well, this ACHV is June 20th. So keep an eye on that. Let's go to context, CNTX. And CNTX has data at ASCO for their CTIM 76. So that's one to watch. They've shown encouraging data in the CDLN6 class, and their read-through ahead to CTIM 76 top-line data is in June. The overall response rates, fall broadly in line with other PROC ADCs, setting the bar for 40 to 50% for the CTIM in PROC in their indication. So not sure exactly what that is. I didn't write that down in my notes, and I should have. But I do know two things. First of all, their phase 1A interim data for their ongoing trial of CTIM 76 is expected in June. I think it's going to be at ASCO. And then they're going to have phase 1A interim data for their CT95 drug, which is expected in September of 2026. So, keep an eye on that. They've got, I believe, about $40 million in cash, and it's one to watch closely. CNTX, and I own that one, so I really like CNTX. And then let's look at a few more. Let's look at CLYM. So Climb Bio is definitely one you need to be watching. They're overweight. Piper Jaffray's overweight on this company, or Piper Sandler, and it's just one that has a lot of key catalysts ahead. So they have initial Budo ITP data are anticipated in June. Safety data for the CLYM 166 are expected in June, with pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic data expected in mid 2026. And then they've got their data that's going to be in the fourth quarter. So there's a lot of stuff going on with this one, and just keep that on your radar. I don't own it, and it's a higher price stock, around $11, but I still think there's a lot more for it to go. And then there's Last but not least, and this is one that I own, I really like, is NRX Pharmaceutical. Um, it shot up. It was up over $1 today. Um, and they had a Type C FDA meeting that with the FDA that provided a clear NDA pathway for their NRX 100, which was supported by real world evidence and a broader proposed indication, significantly de-risking the program. So this drug that they are going to get approved on July 29th has passed all the manufacturing inspections, and it's Keta free. And so it's instead of calling it a good PDUFA, they call it GDUFA. So a generic drugs user free act. But that should get approved. And then they had a Type C meeting with the FDA recently, which de-risks their NRX 100 NDA and expands their opportunity for ketamine and other indications. So um, it's really strong right now. The CEO, Jonathan Javitt, talked about how the FDA required no additional non-clinical studies or bridging studies for review of NRX 100's NDA, and importantly, this company NRX may pursue a broader indication in treatment-resistant depression in the context of suicidality, rather than limiting the label to acute suicidality. So their plans are to provide additional details following the receipts of these final minutes. And in many people's view, this outcome meaningfully reduces the regulatory uncertainty, with their NRX anticipating a second quarter 2026 NDA submission and a 2026 PDUFA date. So they could end up having a PDUFA date at the end of this year after having one in July on the 29th. So I think the enthusiasm is around what we saw in the price action today. And, also going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the call, this pivotal one study, it's really significant move for the FDA because it shows that the FDA is willing to show some flexibility around new drugs and around drugs that in the past have shown and demonstrated efficacy and tolerability around primary and secondary endpoints and have been forced to do another study. They've definitely rescinded and said, "Hey, we need to make these drugs available to these pharma companies that have spent years developing them." And so today was a big step for biotech in general. But that's it on the plays. I think June is going to be a huge month with ASCO, and we've covered some of those plays, and May was a big month as we saw.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks so much as always. Obviously, a ton of information there. Christian's alluding to our conference calendar here, where we have all of the conferences listed. Obviously, ASCO is something that is coming up, and obviously a huge conference. So, please stay tuned on all of that. And like I said, Jeff, we really appreciate all of the information that you provided for all of those catalysts. It was great as always, and definitely agree. I think there's a lot of exciting things ahead in June, and more to come.
I got to say one more thing, John. There's a one that I own that I would be remiss if I didn't. KTTA. So KTTA is Pacifica. They deal with MEK inhibitors for multiple indications and cancers. They do RAS, RAF, NF1 mutated cancers. But that stock, I own that. It's got a tiny market cap, but I think they're going to be presenting data in the second or in the second quarter, and also in the second half. It's going to be updated interim data for the PAS-004 drug. So that's the last one, but I own that, and that's one I really like a lot. So, but yeah, I'm looking forward to ASCO and a lot of the opportunities that biotech continues to bring. And make sure you guys are looking at your catalyst calendar, because it's the most up to date that you'll see on with regards to any clinical catalyst. I mean, I go to it, I write down all the information that I need, and it gives me when those specific dates are coming out in terms of timelines around these catalysts. When to buy in terms of how I'm looking at moving that catalyst along the pendulum before data and how comfortable I feel holding it into data. So it's really important to have through the Biopharm Catalyst calendar.
We really appreciate that, Sheff, and thank you so much for the kind words around the work that our team does. So really appreciate it. And and for those of you on the call, or those of you listening in on YouTube or on Spotify or Apple Music, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we do have an annual sale going on right now, so please feel free to check that out, where you can subscribe and get access to all of our tools. We're offering some pretty great discounts right now. So really appreciate you guys listening in and your time. And Sheff, as always, we appreciate your time, and thank you so much for another great episode.
Absolutely.
So we will see everyone next month for a deeper discussion.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, guys.